Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I will be focusing on the letters that open Frankenstein. I will provide a little bit of commentary to help you with your understanding of the text. Mary Shelley's text is a framed narration. Just like Rime of the Ancient Mariner was a framed narration, this too is a framed narration. And the story opens not with Victor Frankenstein, but with Robert Walton. As is laid out in these letters, Robert Walton is a young man who is going on a journey to the Arctic. Set in the 1700s, Robert Walton he's trying to become an explorer to discover some great new discovery up in the Arctic. And he's going on this voyage. And as he goes on this voyage, he writes a series of 4 letters to his sister, Margaret Seville, to try to convince her that he's doing everything he can to be safe and things like that. In that very beginning of letter 1, he says, you will rejoice to hear that no disaster has accompanied the commencement of an enterprise to which you have regarded with evil forebodings. I arrived here yesterday, and my first task is to assure my dear sister of my welfare. So again, he's writing to her to let her know, look, I'm being safe. I'm going on this voyage, and I hope to discover something great. As he moves later into the letters, he talks about, can you possibly understand the excitement I feel? He's in London, or he's actually far north of London at this point. He's walking through the streets of Petersburg, and he feels the cold breeze on his face, and he's so excited. He says in the middle of this letter, what may not be expected in a country of eternal light. That phrase has 2 meanings to it, by the way. What may not be expected in a country of eternal light. It does have 2 meanings to it. Number one, he's going to a part of the world in the Arctic where, because of the tilt of the Earth and everything else, there are times in the Arctic where the sun never sets, where it skirts the horizon and you have 24 hours of sunlight. And so he's like, I'm going to a part of the world, sister. Can you imagine going to a part of the world where the sun never sets? He says, what can I not discover in a land where the sun never sets? But that phrase also has other meanings as well. In this novel, light and fire symbolize knowledge. So he's talking about here, what can I not discover in a land of eternal light, in science, in the world of science and discovery? What may I not discover as I make my way north? Let's see here. You cannot contest the inestimable benefit that I shall confer on all mankind by discovering maybe a passage to near the pole to those countries to reach at present so many months are requisite, or ascertaining the secret of the magnet. These are all things that he thinks he can accomplish as he makes his journey to the north. He gets into this in this letter 1. He talks about that as a young child, he had always enjoyed going to his Uncle Thomas's library, reading books about voyages. This is what young men would do at the time. They'd read stories about famous sailors who would go on voyages across the ocean and the adventures that they would face. But his father, Walton's father, never really supported him in this. His father, thought that Walton was educated, that he was too good to be a common sailor. And this will start a motif in this text of ineffective father figures. All Robert Walton wants to do is to be this explorer, to go on these voyages on a ship, and yet his father forbids him to do so. And so Walton does try. He mentions in this letter that he does try for a certain time. He does try for a certain amount of time to become a poet. He thought that maybe he would one day be as famous as Shakespeare or Homer, but of course that doesn't work out. But then he does come into some money. His father dies. He does inherit some money, and now Robert Walton has the opportunity to go on some great voyage. And so he does. He's writing to her. He's letting her know, I'm going to the Arctic. I'm going to explore. You got to imagine the 1700s. The Arctic would be like us exploring Mars. It was a place that no one had set foot. For him, it was like going to an alien planet. And in the last part of this letter, he gives us a very chilling sense of foreboding here when he says, I do not intend to sail until the month of June. And when shall I return? Ah, my dear sister, how can I answer this question? If I succeed, many, many months, perhaps years will pass before you and I will meet. If I fail, you will see me again soon or never. As if to suggest that if he succeeds, she may not see him for a long time because he'll be going on, tours and giving lectures and things like that. But if he fails, she'll either see him again really soon, like he's gonna have to come right home, or she'll never see him again. Again, establishes that there's some risk in this voyage that he is taking. That moves us to letter 2. In the second letter that he writes to his sister, he communicates the fact that he's feeling lonely. I have no friend, Margaret. When I am glowing with the enthusiasm of success, there will be no one to participate in my joy. Here he is. Robert Walton is well read. He speaks multiple languages. He's an intelligent young man, and he's on a ship of sailors. Now, you would imagine the sailors are blue collar workers. They're not highly educated. Some of them were probably illiterate. And so here he is on a ship with 200 other sailors, and yet he feels lonely. I desire the company of a man who could sympathize with me, whose eyes would reply to mine, he says. Um, I want the want of a friend. And of course, Robert Walton knows that he's making this journey to the Arctic. He'll never find a friend in the Arctic. No one's ever been there before. As he describes in this letter, um, I perceive the necessity of becoming acquainted with more languages than that of my native country. Now I am 28 and in reality more illiterate than many schoolboys of 15. What he means by that is I can speak multiple languages. I've read Shakespeare. I've read Homer. I'm intelligent. And yet on this ship, I can't communicate with anyone. I don't understand how to talk to these sailors. I am more illiterate than a schoolboy of 15. He also in this letter he has this interesting tidbit about this Russian, what I refer to as the Russian woman story, the Russian bride story. Um, he starts to talk about this, the master of the ship. The master is a person of excellent disposition. And he tells this incredible story about this man who's working on the ship with him, who had once negotiated with the father to marry this young Russian bride. The problem was that the bride didn't really love him, and the incredible sacrifice this man makes to make sure that this young woman is able to marry the man that she actually loves. Make sure you pay close attention to that paragraph because it's got some very interesting implications for how women are treated. We will throw around a phrase trafficking in women, how women are owned by the father until they're sold for a dowry and then they're owned by their husband, how women are passed like objects to one another. And while this Russian bride story doesn't seem to advance the plot of the story, that motif of women being objects to be passed from one man to another will play a significant role later in this text. You will notice as well at the end of letter 3, there's an allusion to Rime the Ancient Mariner. But I'm going to the unexplored regions, to the land of mist and ice, but I shall kill no albatross. Therefore, do not be alarmed for my safety. It's important to understand that young Mary Shelley, when she was young Mary Godwin, her father was so famous, William Godwin, that he would invite famous people to his house. And one of those people who would come to his house for dinner was Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And there is a story that Mary Shelley lays out where Samuel Taylor Coleridge came to her house when she was just a young girl. He had dinner there, and that evening he sat in their living room and he read out loud Rime of the Ancient Mariner, the poem that you've read in preparation for this text. And so young Mary Shelley sat listening, and she was enraptured by this incredible story of this ancient mariner and his journey and the shooting of the albatross and all of that that's part of that poem. And Mary Shelley makes no qualms about it that story had a profound impact on the writing of Frankenstein. You will find throughout this text subtle allusions to Victor Frankenstein being the ancient mariner, being the grizzled old man who's speaking to Robert Walton in this text. So again, pay close attention to the allusion to Rime the Ancient Mariner at the end of letter 2. Letter 3 is a quick one. There's not really much to talk about in letter 3, which will bring me here to letter 4. Letter 4 is a big one here. And right at the beginning, it lays out in letter 4 that Robert Walton, as they are getting close, as they arrive in the Arctic, this is in August of that year, as they're arriving in the Arctic, they make a stunning discovery. As he describes, we perceived a low carriage fixed on a sledge drawn by dogs pass onwards towards the north at a distance of a half a mile. A being which had the shape of a man, but apparently of gigantic stature, sat in the sledge and guided the dogs. We watched with rapid progress the traveler with our telescopes until he was lost among the distant inequalities of the ice. At a distance, Robert Walton describes, this morning we woke up and we saw this huge being in this sledge of dogs, driving this sledge of dogs across the Arctic, across a place where no one has ever been before. how strange it is. They can only see it at a distance, but this, ladies and gentlemen, is our first appearance of the monster. The monster driving a sled of dogs across the Arctic is our first appearance here. And then the very next morning, in the morning, however, as soon as it was light, I went upon the deck and found all the sailors busy on one side of the vessel, apparently talking to someone in the sea. It was, in fact, a sledge like that which we had seen before, which had drifted out towards us in the night on a very large fragment of ice. Only one dog remained alive, and there was a human being within it, whom the sailors were persuading to enter the vessel. He was not, as the other traveler seemed to be, a savage inhabitant of some undiscovered island, but an European. When I appeared upon the deck, the master said, "Here's our captain. He will not allow you to perish on the open sea." This is our first appearance of Victor Frankenstein. On the next morning, after they see the monster off at a distance driving this sled of dogs, the next morning, as the ice is breaking up, they find next to the ship another dog sled with a man who is near death. This is Victor Frankenstein, and it's very obvious from this point that Victor Frankenstein is chasing the monster across the Arctic. The question you should be asking yourself is why? What's going to happen that causes him to be chasing this monster across the Arctic? So Walton and his crew bring Victor Frankenstein on board their ship, and instantly they notice, how he looks. His eyes have generally an expression of wildness and even madness. But there are moments when, if anyone performs an act of kindness or does the most trifling service, his countenance is lighted up. He is wretched. Victor Frankenstein won't even come up. Now he's near death here. He won't even agree to come on board Robert Walton's ship until Walton guarantees him that they're heading in the same direction as the monster. It's obvious that Victor's chasing this monster. And so, lo and behold, if you think back to letter 2, Robert Walton had just said in letter 2 how lonely he was, how he'll never find someone who's intelligent in the Arctic who can speak with him. And now all of a sudden, what happens? But he happens to conveniently, talk about serendipity here, he finds Victor Frankenstein in the Arctic. And so for several weeks as they're on their voyage, Robert Walton starts to nurse Victor Frankenstein back to health. And obviously he's so excited. He wants to talk to Victor about his hopes and dreams and everything else. As he describes later in this letter, to give utterance to the burning ardor of my soul and to say with a fervor that warmed me how gladly I would sacrifice my fortune, my existence, and my every hope to the furthering of my enterprise. One man's life or death were but a small price to pay for the acquirement of knowledge, which I sought for the dominion I should acquire to transmit it over the elemental foes of our race. And so, Robert Walton just wants to tell Victor how excited he is about making some discovery. And as he does so, he gets an interesting response from Victor. He's expecting the Victor is going to be like, "Yeah, absolutely. Great job, buddy." However, we get this instead. As I spoke, a dark gloom spread over my listener's countenance. At first, I perceived that he tried to suppress his emotion. He placed his hands before his eyes, and my voice quivered and failed me. I beheld tears trickle fast from between his fingers, and a groan burst from his heaving breast. "Unhappy man, do you share my madness? Have you drank of the intoxicating draught? Hear me. Let me reveal my tale, and you will dash that cup from your lips." Victor looks upon Robert Walton. He's like, "Are you mad? Are you going to sacrifice your life for the acquirement of knowledge? Hear my story." Boy, doesn't that sound like the Ancient Mariner? Hear my story, and you will no longer feel that way. You would dash that metaphorical cup from your lips. And so the story begins here. This is now Victor Frankenstein as an old man, or not as an old man, excuse me, later in his life. This is Victor Frankenstein telling Robert Walton his story, what happened to him, with the hopes that if he teaches this lesson to Robert Walton, then Walton won't make the same mistakes that Victor has made. This is the same thing as the Ancient Mariner speaking to the wedding guest, trying to make sure the wedding guest doesn't make the same mistakes that he makes. And so as we move into chapter 1, as we get ready to prepare chapter 1 begins Victor's narration. Victor on board the ship as they're chasing the monster, telling to Robert Walton the story, his story, so that Robert Walton might learn from his mistakes. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a classic example of a framed story. I have posted on Google Classroom a link to the 1831 text, so make sure that you are reading letters 1 through 4, and make sure you email me if you have any questions. Thanks again. Stay safe, and stay healthy.